You're listening to Trax FM's podcast. If you've enjoyed our content, more podcasts are available on the RTM Click app and website. Let us know what you think. Please email us at traxfm.rtm@gmail.com. Like and follow us on social media at Trax FM Official.
Good morning and welcome to What Matters. My name is KJ and you are with me all the way till 2 p.m. And on What Matters today, we are talking about climate change, a very, very important issue, an issue very close to everyone's heart right now. And our guest over the phone lines today would be Mogesh Sababathy, and we are talking about the UNICEF Climate Champion. Now, he's a UNICEF Youth Climate Champion. And let's start talking about climate change with Mogesh. Good morning, Mogesh. How are you?
Hi, KJ. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing quite well. Thank you so much. Now, of course, climate change is a term that is being used quite often. And of course, there is a very, very deep meaning behind it. Let's talk about what is climate change and what causes it. Can we start off with that?
Right, sure. So, climate change refers to long-term changes in the average weather patterns that is observed on Earth, right? And it's primarily caused by the increase in greenhouse gas concentrations in the Earth's atmosphere, which eventually leads to the trapping of heat and resulting in a warming effect, commonly known as global warming. Now, in Malaysia and Southeast Asia, we have been witnessing the effects firsthand, like rising of temperatures, heat waves, changes in rainfall patterns, and more frequent extreme weather events. And one thing to remember, we need to be very mindful of our daily choices first to collectively address the root causes of climate change, which is human activities, which has already been proven to be the major contributor to climate change. And and also on a larger scale, the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas, which releases carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. Deforestation, industrial processes, and certain agricultural practices also contribute to the release of these gases and eventually causing climate change.
Absolutely. Now, from my understanding, ever since the Industrial Revolution started, in total, I think our Earth has gone up by a couple of degrees, which was not noticed before that. But I guess that can be considered part of climate change as well, right?
Yep, that is true.
All right. So let's talk about the scientists. Now, how do the scientists study and measure on the climate change itself?
Right. Now, when we talk about climate change, right, scientists are like the frontliners. Right, they're at the forefront, and science and scientific evidences are the only way that we can understand the complexities of climate change comprehensively. And why? It's because not only do they help our understanding of climate change, but also to the development of science-oriented strategies and policies to mitigate the effects of climate change and develop evidence-based decisions. And how this is measured, how climate change is measured, scientists, they study through a combination of direct observations, satellite data, and computer models. They collect data on temperatures, precipitation, sea level, and other climate-related variables over extended periods of time. And satellite technology obviously provides a global perspective, and monitoring changes in land cover, ice cover, and of course also atmospheric conditions. And scientists also use models like this to simulate future scenarios based on different levels of greenhouse gas emissions. And one very famous scientific report that we often refer to for the state of scientific, technical, and socioeconomic knowledge on climate change is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, also known as IPCC report, which is released in intervals of about 6 years. And the last one was published just last year in 2022. And maybe if I can quickly share also that the report confirms that human-induced climate change is widespread, rapid, and intensifying, and that unless there are immediate, rapid, and large-scale reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, limiting global warming to close to 1.5 degrees Celsius or even 2 degrees Celsius will be beyond reach.
And of course, the number might seem small, but there is major consequences, even an increase of 1 or 2 degrees Celsius. Now, what are the consequences of climate change on the environment, ecosystems, as well as wildlife? Right.
Climate change is not just a theory anymore. It's already reshaping our world, right? And every year we're breaking records for the hottest year. And this continuous warming is is definitely a clear indication of the ongoing climate crisis. And very recently, in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, there were media reports stating that the Earth has reached a tipping point of 2 degrees Celsius warming for the very first time that scientists have long cautioned about. Now, why this is important? Because, like I said, exceeding 1.5 degree threshold means there are catastrophic and irreversible impacts on the planet and ecosystem. And this is probably just temporary, but it does not mean that we shouldn't be doing anything about it, because it's really a symptom. It shows that the planet is getting steadily hotter and hotter. Now, if you're wondering, should we Malaysians be concerned? Most definitely, right? Because now Malaysia contributes only about 0.36% to the global carbon emission pool. But despite our relatively small contribution, Malaysia is feeling the impacts very intensely, like how we've been experiencing, the intense weather events lately. And we must also recognize our common but differentiated responsibilities on the global scale and play our part, because as a developing country, we are also suffering the brunt of the crisis. And as we're talking now, some parts of the country is flooded, right? Displacing people, affecting children, especially to their education, and exposing them to various health risks, including their physical and mental well-being. And if I can quickly share also, according to UNICEF, Malaysia ranks 61 among 163 countries where children are most at risk from climate change. And the recently published Change for Climate report by UNDP and UNICEF found that 90% of surveyed youth in Malaysia face climate and environmental hazards. Now, on the other hand, it also has significant consequences on the environment, ecosystems, and wildlife. And in Malaysia, the impacts are very noticeable, especially in the last decade, in the form of changing rainfall patterns, more frequent and intense storms, and rising sea levels, right? And these changes affect not only the health of the ecosystem, but also the health of the living organisms, including human, animals, and plants, the mangroves, coral reefs, tropical rainforests, and eventually threatening the biodiversity in the region, right? So same goes to the wildlife. They also face challenges like, unfavorable habitat conditions and disruption in food sources. And this would also cause animals and plants, especially the endangered ones, to struggle to adapt or face increased risk of extinction.
And also, even talking about very sensitive organisms such as corals and all of that, even a 1 degree change in temperature in seawater can cause them to, not be as they are supposed to, right?
Yes, coral bleaching.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, Mr. Mogesh, what we're going to do is we're going to be taking a very short break. We're going to be listening to a song. And once we come back, we'll talk more about how climate change impacts weather patterns and also some of the human causes that are contributing to climate change itself. And I'm going to put you on hold. And to our listeners out there, we are currently speaking about climate change. And if you do have any questions for our guest today, Mr. Mogesh Sababathy, who is a UNICEF Youth Climate Champion, you can send it to our Facebook Live, which is currently going on Tracks FM. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be back. Welcome back to What Matters. Today we're speaking about climate change with Mogesh Sababathy, who is a UNICEF Youth Climate Champion, and it is a very important topic that we are talking about today. And Mogesh, how does climate change impact weather patterns and extreme weather events? Could you elaborate on that?
Right, sure. So climate change is very intricately linked to shifts in weather patterns and the intensification of extreme weather events. And this impacts, are particularly relevant in Malaysia, like how we discussed earlier, the frequency and severity of extreme weather events. Yeah. And we're also already witnessing a noticeable increase in the frequency and intensity of tropical storms, floods, droughts, especially in this part of the world. How does this happen? Now, the warming of the Earth's surface results in more vapor in the atmosphere, leading to intensified rainfall during storms, and this contributes to the heightened risk of flooding. And the warming of sea surface temperatures, which is the effect of global warming, among many others, also contributes to more intense tropical cyclones, and eventually posing threats to coastal communities and increasing the vulnerabilities of low-lying regions, including Malaysia and island states.
Right. So, and of course, one of the major things that you said earlier is, of course, what are the human causes? Can we speak about the human causes and their contributions to climate change?
Right. So, scientists, majority of the scientists around the world agreed that human activities are the primary drivers of climate change, and this is due to the effects of burning of fossil fuels, deforestation, and industrial processes that have been getting more and more rampant over the last decade, which releases obviously significant amounts of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, methane into the atmosphere. And Malaysia, with its growing economy, has experienced increased emissions from industrial sectors and transportation, contributing to the global climate crisis. And if we're looking at deforestation, right, driven by mostly agricultural expansion, particularly palm oil cultivation has definitely further compounded the issue. So the loss of forests does not only reduces the Earth's capacity to absorb carbon dioxide, but also leads to biodiversity loss, affecting ecosystems and the people dependent on them, the people and animals and plants depending on them. And the interconnectedness between human actions, climate change, and Malaysia being a maritime nation, the ocean's role as a carbon sink is also a very important aspect of the environmental challenges that we face, because Malaysia relies quite heavily on its oceans for resources, livelihoods, and cultural identity even. So, but unfortunately, human activities have taken a toll on not only the land, but also the marine environment, like with overfishing, unsustainable practices of fishing, pollution, particularly from plastic waste and industrial discharges, that contributes to the degradation of marine ecosystems. And this does not only affect the diverse marine life, but also weakens the ocean's ability to sequester carbon effectively. And obviously for Malaysia, the health of the ocean is intricately linked to climate change mitigation efforts. And so addressing climate change in the context of a maritime nation like Malaysia definitely requires a more comprehensive and a more holistic approach.
And how would you say climate change affects agriculture as well as food security?
Right. So changes in temperature, like I said earlier, rainfall patterns, and frequency of extreme weather could definitely directly impact, crop yields, livestock health, and fisheries. And agriculture sector even is one of the most important components of Malaysia's economy. And unpredictable weather patterns like what we're experiencing today can lead to crop failures, affecting the livelihoods of farmers and the overall food supply chain, and eventually putting the entire food system on risk, right? So and so as increased temperatures and water scarcity can contribute to the spread of pests and diseases, and further compromising food production as well. And what we need to do now is to start adopting climate resilient agricultural practices, invest in sustainable farming technologies, promote adaptive crops to enhance the resilience of the agriculture sector. And part of my work at UNICEF is also to advocate for policies that support climate change mitigation and adaptation approaches, including climate smart agriculture, and ensure food security for future generations.
And of course, mitigation. Now, that is a word that you use. And what measures are being taken globally to mitigate climate change?
Now, globally, especially in the last few years, we could see that there's been more and more measures being implemented to mitigate climate change. And Malaysia is definitely actively participating in this effort. For instance, the Paris Agreement, a landmark international accord, outlines the commitments from nations to limit global warming and adapt to its impacts. And Malaysia has ratified this agreement and is working towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions, enhancing climate resilience, and transitioning to a low-carbon economy. Now, while mitigation efforts are essential, adaptation strategies are equally important, right? And it's adaptation plan without mitigation plan is like addressing the symptoms of a disease without treating its root cause, right? So there is definitely a need for Malaysia to not only focus on mitigation but also prioritize on adaptation strategies, particularly in areas like health and coastal defenses. And this will definitely require a multifaceted approach that involves the government, the NGOs, and the public as well to address the challenges that is posed by climate change. And there is also a need still for more awareness and action from the public because as most Malaysians know what's happening from all this frequent and more severe weather changes, but they're just not sure what they can do to address this issue. So definitely there is a need for more awareness and how they can take part more meaningfully and actively into mitigating and adapting to climate change.
Yep, and I think earlier on you mentioned that we are only contributing about 0.36% to the entire carbon footprint thing. So I think this mitigation should be taken not only just by Malaysia but also by our region for it to actually be successful. Wouldn't you say?
Definitely. Yeah.
All right, what we're going to do right now, Mogesh, is we're going to be taking another short break, and we are going to be right back. We are currently speaking about climate change. We will be back in a bit. Welcome back, and we're currently speaking about climate change with the UNICEF Youth Climate Champion, Mogesh Sababathy. Welcome back. And Mogesh, how does climate change disproportionately affect vulnerable populations?
Right. Now in Malaysia, right, we're talking about vulnerable population. We're looking at many different categories of people, right? There is, children and youth, indigenous people. We have the low-income group people, and many others. And also, especially, we're looking at, like I mentioned earlier, Malaysia is a maritime nation, and vulnerable population also includes people who live in the coastal areas. And they are definitely at an increased risk due to the rising of sea levels, the storm surges and extreme weather events. And rural communities, on the other hand, for people who live in the rural areas, they are mostly dependent on agriculture, and they are also facing a huge challenge in terms of maintaining their crop yields and where it also their livelihoods also depend on agricultural practices, and of course this also contributes to the lack of resources and infrastructure in these areas that kind of increases the vulnerability of this population. But I also like to emphasize on how climate change affects the children and youth, right? So now marginalized children, the young people in Malaysia is definitely on the face of climate crisis, where in many ways, for example, they're very susceptible to infectious diseases, like the widespread of vector-borne and waterborne diseases due to the lack of access to safe water and improper garbage disposal. And if I can also share, a staggering 88% of the global disease burden associated with climate change is borne by children under the age of 5. And of course, this also, it also leads to, access to schools and education, disruption in mobility and quality of education. We noticed this when COVID happened. Also same goes to access to basic services and supplies, health services, safe water and food sources. It also affects the family income, where, the communities who depend on climate-sensitive economic activities, including agriculture, agricultural sector, and of course, health hazards in general that can cause both physical and mental hazards to children and youth, and also to adults, in many ways, including respiratory diseases, mental health issues, and many others.
And I think that is absolutely correct. The children are the ones who are getting hit the hardest. And of course, because climate change is not our generation problem, it's a multi-generational problem. So they would be down the line trying to pick up the pieces. And of course, it is going to affect them much more than us, especially as over time our temperatures do go up. And so let's talk about some renewable energy sources and their potential to combat climate change, Mogesh.
Right. Renewable energy initiatives and renewable energy in whole definitely plays an important role in mitigating climate change. And our country, it's rich in solar and wind resources, and Malaysia has already started increasingly investing in solar energy projects and exploring the potential of wind and water power. Now, what's more important here is like, while renewable energy is a critical step towards a more sustainable future, but it's also important for us to recognize the potential downsides and environmental impacts if it's not managed carefully, right? And it starts from the production and disposal of renewable energy infrastructure, like solar panels, wind turbines, and that can generate a lot of environmental waste and contribute to resource depletion if it's not handled responsibly. And so we definitely need a more comprehensive approach that addresses both benefits and potential drawbacks. It's really important for us to acknowledge this in order to truly achieve eco-friendly and balanced energy transition. And of course, to improve energy efficiency, we must also promote sustainable transportation and individual action as well, for us to be able to enhance the benefits of the usage of renewable energy, moving towards a more sustainable future.
I completely agree with that, because recently I did read an article that stated that the creation of batteries, high energy batteries, especially for electric vehicles, at certain times, and if it unmanaged correctly, can, as you say, lead to resource depletion, and also it's a high waste, high energy consumption, high carbon base just for the production of the battery itself. So a lot of people were arguing whether down the line would it actually be as environmentally friendly, and would it actually have the potential to combat climate change as it was said initially. But yes, I completely agree with you on that one. But before we end, Mr. Mogesh, is there any advice to the listeners on their roles, rather than just letting the governments as well as organizations taking all the effort? What would one person need to do to be able to provide a positive change to climate change?
Right. I think that every individual plays an important role in preserving our planet. Small, everyday actions collectively contribute to meaningful change. And this could simply, by starting to adopt sustainable practices in your daily life, like reducing energy consumption, minimizing waste, and making eco-friendly choices. Next is also to stay informed and engage in conversations about climate change in your community, supporting initiatives that promote environmental conservation and sustainable development. And for youth listeners, recognize the power of your voice and advocacy, get involved in local and global initiatives, join youth-led organizations like Youth Environment Living Labs, YEL, and demand that decision makers prioritize the needs of future generations. And as we're speaking today, COP28 in Dubai, an international climate summit that brings together world leaders, government officials, and delegates from nearly 200 countries, are coming together to discuss and negotiate ways to address the climate crisis and accelerate climate action. And it's already concluding its first week, and we're hoping for meaningful agreements and commitments to tackle the pressing issues related to global warming and climate crisis, including increasing the participation of young people and the marginalized communities in decision-making spaces. Now, we have plenty of reports, frameworks, policies, roadmaps, but governments now should prioritize in implementing and enforcing policies. And regulation must also come in a way that industries should also be held accountable and have a responsibility to adopt sustainable practices. And then I'd like to end by saying, we have been speeding towards the wrong direction. We definitely need urgent and collective efforts, interministerial, intersectorial, whole of society approach to mitigate these impacts and build a resilient future for all.
Right, very well said, Mogesh, and it's an absolute pleasure talking to you today. And of course, you being the UNICEF Youth Climate Champion, you're doing a lot in making sure that the voices are heard, making sure that people are hearing about climate change. Thank you for that as well. And with that, I think it's about time that we end our interview for today.
Thank you so much.
All right, so that was Mogesh Sababathy, who is the UNICEF Youth Climate Champion. And we spoke about climate change today, and absolutely it's a very, very, very important topic to speak about, especially during this current time frame, mainly because, as he said earlier, we are heading down the wrong direction. And for everyone who says there is no such thing as climate change, the results are proving to be very, very different compared to just people saying about it. So please, do what you can. Do what you can as an individual, and collectively we can see a difference. And with that, we end What Matters for today. I will be back in the next hour. Right now, this is a song that he actually requested for earlier. This is Michael Jackson's Earth Song, right here on Tracks.
You're listening to Tracks FM's podcast. If you've enjoyed our content, more podcasts are available on the RTM Click app and website. Let us know what you think. Please email us at tracksfm.rtm@gmail.com. Like and follow us on social media at Tracks FM Official.